What's up, guys? Welcome back to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, Alan Bishop. The place where we try to get you more and more involved in home hobby distillation or even more involved in your art and your passion in the distilled spirits industry. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out at bishopshomegrown@gmail.com or any of my social media, which I do not have memorized because I'm the most unprofessional distiller on the face of the planet, or in the YouTube comments down below. And we'll do our best to answer your question to the best of our ability based upon the knowledge that we've gained from this beautiful art form. So today I wanted to take a moment. I'll preface this by saying I will be doing some more sort of process videos at some point in time. They're a little harder to do sometimes, filming by myself and running through all those methods and all those steps and everything. I like doing them. I don't necessarily like editing them and all that stuff. And I think Bo Cumberland and I at some point will probably be doing a little more of that ourselves, and I may do some of it at home too, little short versions. And there's some documentary stuff that's still yet to come out that hopefully will in the near future. But today, what I wanted to kind of dive into was making a quote unquote base spirit for botanical distillation, and then sort of talking through botanical distillation and some things that I've learned over the years that might help some of you guys and gals that are starting to get into botanical distillations. So and we'll just kind of stick this to a home hobby scale, although things that I say here can be taken and put into context in a commercial distillery. The vast majority of base spirits for, say, gin or aquavit or absinthe or liqueurs traditionally have been at a much higher proof than standard double pot distilled or pot and thumper spirits, which a lot of times tend to fall anywhere between, let's say, depending on how high your specific gravity is, anywhere between 125 proof all the way up to 135, sometimes 138 roughly. That's a pretty good average for most pot stills without, let's say, a defumator or plates or anything of that nature. Just double pot stilled distillation, including with a thumper. Those actually, you can use those as base spirits, that double pot distilled stuff, and make your heads cut and your hearts cut and your tails cut, save your hearts, and use that as a base for your botanical spirits. But traditionally, almost always, even going back to the 1600s and the alchemists, going back, well, even into the 1500s, almost all those base spirits, a lot of them being either brandy or sugar beet based, something of that nature, particularly in Europe, they were almost always pot distilled multiple times, maybe 3 to 4 times, to get up to a higher proof. Of course, with the advent of multiple retorts, which has existed for a long time, what you might think of as multiple thump barrels, they were able to get to a higher proof much easier with a single or a couple distillations, and then also with a defumator or plates or anything of that nature, it obviously made life easier. But back in the day, really what was considered the kind of premium base spirit for one of these particular botanical distillations was something wherein you would get to a higher proof, say 170 proof, but still have a little hint of the flavor that would be left behind in that base neutral alcohol, a backbone of sorts that you could build off of to create a beautiful spirit, whereupon that base alcohol was not overwhelming the things that you've added into the painting, right? Think of it as your canvas. That base alcohol is your canvas, and maybe that canvas doesn't have to be a white piece of paper. It can be whatever color you want it to be, right? And you can shade it as much as you want to by selecting those higher proofs and leaving some things behind and taking some things out. So typically, for example, with early absinthes, they were brandy based, and it was brandy that was coming out of France, going into the Val de Travers region, and maybe even being rectified one more time or distilled one more time before it was made into absinthe. The other reason for the 170 proof is there are some other traditional methods where you use lower proof for extractions and digestions. And I'll define those real quick here. So a digestion would be taking your alcohol, heating it up to at least 100 degrees, if not all the way up to 140 degrees, and holding it there on your botanicals for about an hour or so. And a maceration is when you then leave those botanicals to steep in that base alcohol for at least 24 hours or however long you're going to let them go. But there were other ways of doing this, obviously at lower proofs, 80 proof, 70 proof, somewhere in there. Some of the old gins were done that way. Bearing in mind this, depending on how high proof your alcohol is or how low proof your alcohol is, and depending on what compounds you're trying to extract from which botanicals, higher proof alcohols might be better at extracting some certain compounds from some botanicals, and other wanted compounds at a lower proof from other botanicals. Now, with absinthe, quite often, and aquavit, the base alcohol was, from my research and what I've seen throughout the years in multiple books, was typically going to be somewhere in that 160 to 170 range. A little more neutral, right? A little more base, a little lighter on the palate in order to, sort of mix and match the other flavors you're going to add in. So the traditional method would be to take that alcohol at 170 proof and take it up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit with the botanicals in the liquid, or if you're at home and you're worried about scorching things, heat the liquid and then pour that into a jar or a bucket or whatever is going to hold your botanicals in order to get that digestion and let it naturally cool overnight and get an extraction as well. A lot of times back then they weren't using thermometers. The old rule of thumb then was literally 140 on the cape of the still should be right at the point where you can put your hand on it, hold your hand there for just a second before it gets too hot to hold your hand there. And then obviously take your hand off, turn the fire off, elements off, whatever you're using nowadays, and use that alcohol for your extraction methodology. That tends to make a cleaner base spirit, in my opinion. Going to that higher proof as well with that initial distillation, that 170 proof, that also does some interesting things during distillation. Not only are you getting a little different extraction at a higher proof and at a higher temperature than you would be at a lower proof and a lower temperature, again, depending on botanical, but you're also sort of compressing things with alcohol, right? So now you're going after very alcohol soluble compounds. So when you get ready to distill with those compounds in the still, bear in mind that that's going to affect the way that you cut. On a normal pot still, you may cut the tails for white spirit at 100 proof or down to 95. You might cut the tails for an aged spirit, a long aged spirit, somewhere between 88 and 92, roughly. Now these are just my numbers and this is from my experience. With something that's been distilled that third time or fourth time, whatever it happens to be, or is at a high proof to start with, 170 up to 190, and I'm not a big fan of 190, I'll just tell you right up front, remember that your tails are going to start earlier. They're going to start closer to 120 proof. So typically what you would do is you'd cut the tails at 120 proof. There's also going to be a section of alcohol below 120 proof, let's say from 120 to 80, which isn't really tails. What it is water-soluble compounds that are now distilling across from those plants, and a lot of them are very vegetative and they're not very good. So most of the old protocols would tell you to set that stuff aside, put it back into the next run for neutral alcohol that you're going to make for that product, and then collect your tails from 80 down to 20 and use that for the next run of the same botanically infused distilled spirit. Now, another one of the things that you might want to keep in mind, we'll get into this in a future video if you guys are interested, is you can do digestion and maceration, or you can do vapor distillation, or you can do all kinds of cool stuff in between, like using a Tennessee Thumper, where you're really getting a little bit of both vapor distillation and maceration, digestion, all in one thing. And the botanicals you use will very much affect, and the flavors you want out of those botanicals will very much affect the way that you approach them. Real quick, last little thing in this video, and then we'll do some more things on this here shortly. At home, real simple base wash that you can make that has worked great for me on every botanical spirit I've ever made at home. 50 pounds of sugar, invert it if possible. If you know how to invert sugar, look it up on Google, and that'll tell you how to do it. To that, add maybe 5 pounds of oats, flaked oats, rolled oats, etc., and then a pound of raisins. And the reason that we add raisins, and you can add much more raisins than that if you want. I like to add 3 or 4 pounds a lot of times. We're trying to sort of get a little bit of that brandy flavor into it, and those raisins bring that brandy flavor over just a little tiny bit, and then those oats bring a very creamy mouthfeel because of the long chain fatty acids they have. This is a great base alcohol. This is also great for people who distill at home for tinctures and things of that nature. So again, 50 pounds of water, 50 pounds of invert sugar, 1 to 3 to 5 pounds of raisins, the more the better, and maybe 5 pounds of rolled oats. Ferment it off and distill it. I like to basically do a stripping run, and then I like to take and run just a little bit of reflux and take it up to 170 proof, and that's my base neutral alcohol. I make my heads and tails cuts there, again at 120 going from into tails, and I'm ready to go for my maceration and digestion for absinthe or gin or aquavit. So, all right guys, love you. Catch you later.